Joël Ruet, do you think France is prepared for the next level?
France is neither less nor more prepared than any other country. I think globally we have a shared problem, which is a disjunct between science and the social and economic implications. On the science side, there is a learning process. It's a new process. It took a few weeks to learn. It would have taken the next few weeks to disseminate the learning and the lessons and etc. And there comes the issue of social distancing. Social distancing is understandable from the point of view of curbing an epidemics. The only question is what's the right locus, it has been said. Should it be at the level of the household, the Chinese way? Should it be at the level of the border, the American way? Most likely it's in between. Now the problem is that until and unless we have a learning on the right scale of doing this social distancing, on the right measures, then we transform a problem which is medical into a political problem and into an economic problem. If you lock everyone home, you destroy the economy. If you close the borders but let everyone circulate, you will log the hospitals, but you will still destroy the economy because it's not just money, it's not just goods that circulate, it's also people in a modern economy with services. So to find the
really
right...
destroy the economy, or will it just put it on hold? That we just, we have to wait it out. We got to sit it out.
I like your question. If we wouldn't have stocks, if we wouldn't have bearish stocks, we would just put it on hold. But we have stocks, we have bearish stocks, and they amplify the problem. And there we come with solutions which are false solutions. To everyone who has a hammer, he wants to see the problem of being a nail. You know, he sees every problem as being a nail. So here we don't have a financial crisis. We have an economic crisis, and we don't even have an economic crisis. We have a stocks crisis. That's absolutely different.
It's a supply chain crisis.
All right.
It's a supply chain pose. It's not a crisis yet.
Dr. Moskos, where you are in the north of England, not many people have a lot of money in the market. And so what's the view as to, in this case, taking your medicine means of quarantining of entire nations, possibly?
That's a very difficult question to answer. I'm afraid I'll have to admit that I'm not a local to the Northeast. I live in the Northeast for the last 3 years. And it would be inappropriate for me to comment about what the local people think as much. I've not become that much a member of the community.
Well, let me ask you what you think on this, Dr. Moskos. Is look, the economic pain, well, that's just something you have to do right now.
It's worth it. No, I'm sorry. We have to put our priorities right. If we're not going to actually stop the healthcare systems from collapsing, the damage to the economy is going to be very different. So I agree we have to decide on what functions are essential and maintaining those functions. And hey, look at the Chinese. They still manage to get the food on the streets. They still manage to get the medicines as much as possible in the rest of the country on the streets. So let's get our priorities right and then think about how we will sustain the economic activity in the recovery phase. Now, there were some announcements from central banks. I believe in Italy, they said they're going to suspend payments for mortgages for 3 months. Here in the UK, some banks have advised that they will not, I believe, charge interest, or they will offer some bridging loans at very low interest because of the outbreak. There are tools that can be taken to support people. But we have to make sure that society goes through this, that we can do everything that we need to make sure society goes through this, and then we restore function.
Raf Harfouch?
I think that's absolutely right, but let's not forget that we are in a digital age, we're in a technology age. There are things that we can do to support local businesses. I would encourage everybody to buy gift certificates of their local mom and pop shops. I'm very connected to a lot of the people that own restaurants here. One of my favorite restaurants, Holy Belly, they posted that they were empty, that they were struggling after the protests, after the strikes. And if you can't go in person to visit them, buy gift certificates. We need to help these small businesses. So there are ways that we can innovate. There are ways people are working from home. People are finding other solutions. Museums are giving virtual tours. Businesses are coming together. So let's not just say, okay, we're going to quarantine, we're going to shut everything down because of the stock market. Let's say, what can we possibly do to help make sure that all the small businesses, the entrepreneurs, the gig economy workers, all of the baristas and the bartenders and the servers and the people who can't stay home, the people who can't afford to self-quarantine, what can we do to support them? Because that's going to be a really big cost.
And what about what's been happening in the United States this week with the sudden shutting down of college campuses?
I mean, while that's concerning, I will say that the good news is that most of colleges and most of the universities have online learning. Most of the students have shifted to online learning. So that is going to be a bit disruptive, but they're still getting access to their education, which I think is great. So we have the tools in place. We have these tools. We should use them, but we should also not forget that not everybody has the privilege of just being able to stay at home. And I love France's entrepreneurial community. I love the small business community, the artisan community. We should be putting plans in place to help support them, because Google can send all their employees to work from home. They're fine. I want to make sure as a citizen, as a Parisian, that we don't forget our friends that are running these local businesses that are so important to the heart of our city.
And I think I agree with that, but I think that in a way, all the measures we talked about, they are supply measures. They are trying to make sure that businesses are still able to provide something. The problem, if we enter into a recession, and we were already on the verge of one, or people were discussing before this whole thing exploded, when it just was sort of creeping along, is the demand. There is no point in making sure restaurants are still there and survive when people don't go, when infrastructure is not being invested in. And I think, never let a good crisis be unused. This is the moment where, in fact, the lack of infrastructure investment that Europe has been doing, it has to be remedied. We need to, it sounds a bit Keynesian, but it is true. We need to spend our way out of that recession. We can't just lower interest rates.
It's interesting you should say that, Jakob, because there's been a lot of accusatory fingers pointed at your native Germany this Thursday.
Yes.
Saying, Angela Merkel announcing, well, maybe we can run a budget deficit this year, that's nowhere near enough.
No, and it's not enough. And it's the problem, as always, that Germany, through its very peculiar historic lens, is distorting and imposing something on Europe, which I think is detrimental, which, you can ask yourself, why did Brexit happen? And I'm really not a friend of Brexit.
Okay.
That's where the break line of Europe will come. And if we don't do this, Europe will become under much more stress once this crisis is over.
But you can't just confuse 1,000. There are so many complicated things. I think the part of the issue of dealing with this is everyone's talking about, Brexit and supply chains and borders and everything. What people need right now is clear guidelines on what they can do as an individual level, what they can do for their teams and organizations, and then what we can do as a country. Anything else than that is just nothing but philosophy. I know you're saying that demand and supply, but we're talking about people's lives here. We're talking about people's lives.
But we're talking about people's life as a politician. As politicians, we need to take care of people's lives for the next 2 months to make sure that we survive, which is all the things about social distancing. But we also need to make sure that life goes on beyond that. We can't getting into this hole, and then when we come out, everything is lost.
We've lost nearly a month not taking lessons from Asia about the people's life, about the organization's life. I agree. Now, the pressing subject is to recover the time. And the second pressing subject, or maybe at par, is to see what would be the economic answer to those organizations. The economic answer cannot be through finance. It cannot be just through budget. It cannot go just the way we saved and rescued the systemic banks 12 years ago. It has to be through the commercial banks, it has to be through the local banks, it has to be through the banks that support the entrepreneurs, the companies.
All right, on that score,
the owner of the bar.
Let's listen on that score to the head of the European Central Bank. It's not every day that the head of the ECB blasts EU governments. That's exactly what the newly appointed Christine Lagarde did this Thursday.
I tell you what I'm particularly worried about. It would be the complacency and slow motion process that would be demonstrated by the fiscal authorities of the euro area in particular.
All right, great words, except markets went through the floor after she said that, because what they wanted was an interest rate cut.
Well, and they need an interest rate cut at the top level, and they need free loans for the small entrepreneurs, the small shops, because whether we want it or not, even if we have a supply shock, there will be a demand problem, and I agree with that. And then people, the small entrepreneurs, the small factories, the small restaurants, bartenders, or whatever, people in service, will have a hole in their income, and they need money to cover that, and it should be at free cost.
But the interest
If I
rate
may, I'm sorry, we need to refocus to the point that our colleague just made about advice that we need to provide to the people. So I will start with a very simple advice. Wash those hands, number one. Number two, keep space with your colleagues, keep space with your friends. At home, if you've got symptoms, stay in one room. Number three, if you have a small business, think about taking that business away from where you are, where your customer comes to you, to the customer itself. People will still want to have a drink and they will still want to have a nice meal. You know what? Maybe it's time for that restaurant that doesn't have anybody coming through the door to start wrapping up some packages and asking the waiters to become delivery boys for a day or two, or a week or two, or a month or two. Be entrepreneurial. Let's try and solve the problem creatively. People will still have some money, some work to do. We all need to think creative and think about protecting each other and helping each other.
Jakob Hessler?
No, I agree with you. But the thing is, we need to have both debates. I think, and that's a question then to you, François. There are two debates, which is one, what are the clear signs and advice given to individuals on how to behave and what solidarity and civility means? And then there's a systemic debate, which is about what are we going to do so that when we come out of this mess, we come out with bruises, but not completely destroyed.
Yeah, Rahaf Arfouch at the end of part one was talking about how this is a test of solidarity, right? Because most of us won't have, it won't be fatal for us. It's vulnerable populations, and this is about showing solidarity with those. That's at the individual level. Of course, at the national level, there's the question of what to do there. With Germany and France last week failing to answer Italy's plea for face masks, and China since stepping in, pledging 2 million of them, as well as sending doctors to Italy from Sichuan province. The president of the European Commission this Thursday calling for solidarity among the 27.
We need to support the healthcare sector urgently. I know that Italy lacks personal protective equipment, in particular respiratory devices. I asked my commissioners to work with the industry to increase the production of such equipment. And we are also working with the pharmaceutical industry to increase the supply of medicines. More solidarity is needed in Europe to make sure that doctors and nurses have the protective equipment they need and patients have the necessary treatment.
Now, Dr. Moskos, the solidarity that Ursula von der Leyen is talking about is at the national level, at the European level. Is there enough of it?
Don't forget you're speaking to a Greek. Okay, so the word solidarity means a few more things to me than it means to the rest of you. And I'm hoping this is going to be the last time Europe expresses its solidarity when the core of Europe actually feels at risk. I'll stop there.
Jakob Hessler, is how much of a leadership test is this for the European Union at this point? Is it on par with the Greek crisis? Is it on par with what we've seen?
I think
in
so
past years?
far it's not framed as a European response, which is, I'm not sure it's a leadership crisis. It's a missed opportunity to show how Europe can be relevant for the citizens in helping to address this problem. Now, that being said, for the time being, healthcare policy is not part of the core portfolio of what the EU Commission is supposed to regulate, which is why naturally the thing we are looking and expecting from Europe is then the economic and fiscal and financial policy and rules and stimuli, and but it's an opportunity to, of course, help.
But the medical industry, I mean the drugs industry and the medical industry, those masks and etc., they slightly fall under the regulations.
And we've seen pan-European efforts in the race to find a treatment.
Well, because not even for the treatment, you know, it's been extremely late at the beginning. This was a Chinese disease, full stop, you know, each individual European countries and the EU itself have been extremely long putting budgets on science and research. That's one. Two, the industry. We have a vibrant industry, and the industry is still regulated or partly regulated by the EU. Industry can be versatile. I'm not saying it's easy to convert a plant, a factory that's not producing masks into a plant that is producing one, but if the Chinese can create a hospital in 2 weeks, which we cannot, we can convert our industry. So solidarity should also come from...
Why can't we do it?
But also,
I'm sorry. Hang on. China's far behind us in terms of development.
I'm happy you contradict me, because I've been the Chinese on this plateau many times, and it's what people say. People say, it's a political gesture. I'm happy you contradict me, because I feel like you. We could start building more hospitals. We could convert the industry, and we haven't done. And I agree completely with you, as what you've said from a Greek perspective. There has been a divide within the EU from the north side